The Radio Forest Podcast.
Hey, we're glad to have you, Forrest. Welcome.
Hey, I'm really enjoying your book. We're talking to author Joel Selvin, Drums and Demons, The Tragic Story of Jim Gordon. I knew some of the songs, but you're probably hearing this a lot, right? With your book, realizing how many big hits this guy was a part of.
Well, he played on about 100 of the greatest records of his lifetime. It's just amazing. The diversity, right? I mean, he was Merle Haggard's favorite drummer, and he played on all those Gary Puckett records, which had like 28 musicians on them, but only one drummer. It's just an extraordinary array of big hit records like You're So Vain, Carly Simon, Sundown by Gordon Lightfoot, Rikki, Don't Lose That Number by Steely Dan, not to mention Derek and the Dominos, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. You know, it's an amazing playlist, amazing.
When did you start writing this book? Because he hasn't passed away that long ago, or hadn't rather.
Jim was alive. I started at the beginning of the pandemic, going through my record collection and starting to think about doing this. So it's been 4 years. I would send him letters and send him books and yeah, it is typical of long-term schizophrenics that they become more remote and more withdrawn. And that's how Jim was described to me by people who were inside the joint with him, that he was a quiet and remote presence on the yard. He didn't have a prison job because he had all the royalties from Layla, so he could get everything at the commissary he wanted. And he just spent a lot of time in the day room or his cell. Of course, he was smashed on psychiatric drugs because that's how they managed prisoners of his in California.
And nobody reached out. I know his daughter wouldn't write back to him, but nobody visited him in prison. None of these other rock stars would stop by or check in. You think it was just such a tragic crime?
The crime was so shocking, and it came out of the blue because people didn't know about the years and years of torment and struggle. They didn't know about all the psychiatric treatment, all the residential programs. I mean, Jim was in 15 mental hospitals in 5 years. That's like every couple months checking into a mental hospital. He battled this thing fearlessly, but it was just too strong. And he had a very severe condition. You know, schizophrenia is, like say, super common. And half the schizophrenics who are diagnosed don't respond to treatment at all. I fear that Jim's case was as extreme as they get.
Once he gets out on tour with Cocker and the drugs kind of increase and his life gets a little bit more chaotic, you know, his first marriage ends, he hasn't seen his daughter. You think it's a possibility that some of the drugs kind of cause this sort of shift in his mind or snap? Or do you think it's something he always knew about and kind of struggled with silently?
I actually think the drugs and alcohol were his most effective coping mechanisms. The psychiatric drugs that they put him on were very primitive and sledgehammer. We have more surgical drugs available now, but he was taking these like heavy-duty tranquilizers and antipsychotic medicines along with all the drugs and alcohol. No, I don't think the drugs and alcohol had that much of a contributing factor, although his increased use of them may have been a symptom of the disease growing and gaining ground on him. It does seem that he keeps going down that road as things get worse for him.
On these hit songs like we've been talking about, co-wrote Layla, was on Good Vibrations and worked with the Beach Boys a number of times. Ends up killing his mother, going to prison for 39 years. Half his life he's left in prison then. Joel, what was it like then to touch base with his daughter? That has to be just a huge undertaking for her to struggle with these feelings and the attention.
When I first started the book, I reached out to Mike Post, who was the TV theme guy, and he and Jim started out in the music business together. He's Amy's godfather and close friends with the first wife, Jill. And he was very respectful, but he told me he didn't see any upside to cooperating. And I respected that. These people were in a blast zone of a trauma, the likes of which you never recover from. You know, your life changes and it never comes back. So I went ahead and did the book without their help and finished it and sent it off to the publisher and took a vacation. And the first morning that I was in Hawaii, the phone rings. It's Mike Post. He wants me to know that Jim has died and the family wants to send out a release, but they didn't know how. I did, and I sent out the release, and the family and I became involved, and we did interviews. They gave me photographs, and we developed a relationship. Now, all of them, Mike and Jill and Amy, have read the book, and it was revelatory to all of them. Amy is just, blown away at details she didn't know, and feels all over a sense of compassion that just has been renewed for her. Mike Post and Jill both said the same thing to me, which is they can stop beating themselves up now, stop feeling guilty, because they thought that they could have done more to help Jim. And having read the book, they realized they couldn't have helped him any more than they did. Pretty deep. That's pretty profound. I'll get some good reviews out of book reviewers and stuff, but nothing more meaningful than that.
Talk about some of the iconic shows that you've been to personally, not necessarily ones people have talked about, but shows that you've been to in the Bay Area, because you've been there for such a long time. Yeah. And that was such a hotbed of these iconic bands. So what's one of the first couple ones that stand out in your mind for whatever reason?
There's a couple real good ones to mention. First of all, I went to The Last Waltz. And I got to tell you, the movie's great, but it's got nothing on having been in that room that night. The thing that isn't in the movie that I'll never forget, it's 3:30 in the morning, and everybody in the world has been on stage singing I Shall Be Released, and Dylan's the lead vocal, and they all go off, and the audience just demanded an encore. Minutes went on, and finally the band comes back without any of their guests, and they just rip Winterland at it. New one with Baby Don't Do It. And that was the last moment of the band's career. It was just, it was awesome. In the 90s, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers decided they needed to sort of renew their love of playing music. They were tired of doing these amphitheaters and playing the same songs in the same order and feeling the responsibility of the heavy ticket price and all that. And they sat down at the Fillmore 1,100-seat auditorium for 30 shows in 2 months. And it was like a part-time job for me. Sometimes I could go and catch the beginning of the show and then have to go somewhere else. Or sometimes I'd be somewhere else and I'd go back and catch the end of the show. I was there probably about a dozen nights. And it was just amazing. They were having so much fun. They were playing songs that they wrote that afternoon. They brought in guests like John Lee Hooker and Bo Diddley and Roger McGuinn. It was just like a party that was going on for 2 months.
Well, Joel, I enjoy the book, and I want to say congratulations on that, because I read a lot of books like this, autobiographies or biographies, and sometimes a biography gets too much personality from the author, so you start thinking that the person's just a fan. But this just kind of reads like a story of Jim Gordon and all that going on. So I really appreciated that part of it. That has to be tough. I know that's on purpose too, to at least try to, get the narrative right. So Drums and Demons, the tragic story of Jim Gordon, is out now, and Joel has a ton of other books out there. A great one with Sammy Hagar. Joel, I want to say thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you, Forrest. I really appreciate it.